All right, welcome to your deep dive. So, you sent over some fascinating excerpts from Martin Seligman's What You Can Change and What You Can't, and we're here to help you unpack it all.
Love it.
Yeah, so specifically, we're going to be like really diving deep into Seligman's ideas about, what aspects of ourselves are truly changeable and focusing on anxiety, how it impacts our lives. Plus, we'll be taking this kind of cool side trip into the world of evolution to see how it might be influencing all of this.
Oh, that's going to be fun. A journey into the depths of our evolutionary past. I'm in.
Buckle up.
I like to think of it as starting with two, totally different perspectives on human change. It's like two totally different maps of the same territory.
Right. And Seligman even gives them these names, the age of self-improvement versus the age of biological psychiatry.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like this constant inner battle between you can do anything you set your mind to, and then this voice saying, well, maybe it's your genes holding you back. I feel like we've all been there, right?
Have you ever felt like kind of caught between those two viewpoints?
Absolutely. All the time.
And to illustrate this point, he uses this compelling stories of Trudy and Clay. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
Trudy struggled with her weight for years, always felt like a failure despite trying like every diet and exercise program out there. But then there's Clay, who finds this lasting relief from his panic attacks, not through years of, traditional psychoanalysis, but with this very specific kind of therapy that zeroes in on his thought pattern.
Powerful examples.
So where does Seligman actually land on this whole spectrum of change? Does he pick a side?
Fascinating thing is he doesn't. He rejects both extremes. Like, he doesn't buy into the you can change anything mantra, but he also doesn't believe that we're just puppets of our biology.
It's not all nurture, not all nature either.
Exactly. It's way more nuanced.
And it's especially interesting when you consider that he actually started his career as a learning theorist.
Right. Someone who believed we're essentially blank slates, shaped entirely by our environment, like nurture all the way.
Totally.
Mhm.
But then, through his research, especially the groundbreaking stuff on helplessness and optimism, he started recognizing that our biology actually sets some boundaries on what we can easily change.
Like, he realized our starting point isn't a blank slate after all. It's more like this partially drawn canvas. Some lines are already there.
And some aren't. So there's this interplay between nature and nurture where we have to acknowledge biology, but also see that there's still this huge potential for real change.
Makes total sense, especially when you look back at how we've understood mental health over the years.
Totally. And that leads us right into the rise of what's called biological psychiatry, which has this, central idea that mental illness is basically physical illness.
Yeah, like if something's wrong with your mind, it stands to reason that there must be something physically wrong with your brain.
And that's where the whole drug revolution in psychiatry comes into play with the development of medications designed to directly impact our moods and mental states.
Exactly. And that big shift really got going with the discovery that general paresis, which is this devastating mental illness, it even affected powerful figures like King Henry VIII.
Wow.
Yeah. And it turned out it was actually caused by syphilis.
Syphilis of the mind.
Yeah, so they found out that treating the syphilis infection actually cured the mental illness.
Wow. So it wasn't a mental illness after all. It was a physical illness manifesting as a mental illness.
Exactly. It's a huge turning point.
Yeah.
Total game changer. And it spurred on decades of research into the biological roots of all sorts of mental conditions like schizophrenia, depression, even Alzheimer's. But, it wasn't a simple problem-solved situation. While medications, like, for example, lithium, have been incredibly helpful for things like bipolar disorder.
Right.
For other conditions, the medications are often more about addressing symptoms and not necessarily curing the underlying cause.
And like you said, the potential side effects, which can be a whole other can of worms.
For sure.
So it sounds like what Seligman's saying is we need to proceed carefully, not just blindly accept the biological view as the whole story. It's just one part, one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And this is where his concept of conservation of dysphoria comes in.
Okay, I love this concept.
It's this fascinating idea that even when things are going really well in our lives, we have this tendency to find new things to worry about.
It's like we're hardwired to focus on the negative, even when things are objectively good.
Yeah, we're kind of scanning the horizon for potential threats, even when there's no real need.
Why would we be wired that way?
Well, Seligman suggests it could be this, evolutionary leftover, something passed down from our ancestors who lived in way harsher environments. Like, back then, being vigilant was essential for survival.
Right. If you weren't constantly on edge, you probably didn't last very long.
Exactly. And those who were constantly on edge were the ones more likely to, survive and pass on their genes. It's like we're still running on that ancient software, even though we might not be facing those same threats today.
So you're saying that our anxieties today might be a product of an era we no longer live in. That's kind of a mind-blowing thought.
I know, right?
The
Like, makes you wonder, is my anxiety a realistic response to what's happening right now? Or is it this echo of my evolutionary past?
Oh, that's a great question for all of us to consider.
But what happens when anxiety goes from like a low hum to like a full-blown panic attack?
Yeah, like where do those fit into the picture?
Right, and that's where Seligman takes us next. He really digs into panic and basically describes it as this like anxiety gone haywire.
Okay.
He defines those panic attacks as these really sudden waves of terror,
Uh,
super overwhelming. And they can feel so intense that people often, mistake them for like a heart attack or something.
yeah, it's that feeling of doom, right? Like something terrible is about to happen, even though there's no real danger present.
Exactly. And Seligman contrasts two major viewpoints on like what's going on during a panic attack.
Mhm.
The biological perspective and then the cognitive perspective.
So the biological side would be saying panic attacks are caused by some kind of like chemical imbalance in the brain, right? Like maybe a surge of adrenaline or some other neurotransmitter gone wild.
Yeah, basically. But then the cognitive view kind of turns that on its head.
Mm.
It really zeroes in on what Seligman calls catastrophic thinking. So it's this idea that our thoughts just sort of spiral out of control and they end up amplifying our fears into a full-blown panic attack.
So it's like our brains are misinterpreting our body's normal signals. A slightly elevated heart rate is suddenly a sign of a heart attack, even though it's just, a normal response to stress.
Exactly. And Seligman actually highlights the research of David Clark, who developed this really groundbreaking cognitive therapy for panic disorder that specifically addresses this misinterpretation of bodily sensations.
Oh, interesting. So instead of trying to suppress the anxiety's physical symptoms, Clark's therapy helps people kind of like reframe their thinking about those sensations.
Right. It's about learning to see, like a racing heart, as a normal response to stress, instead of some sign of, like, imminent doom. And what's really amazing is that Clark's research actually showed this cognitive therapy worked better than medication and had way more lasting effects.
Really?
Yeah, those who learned to reframe their thinking were much less likely to relapse than those who just relied on meds alone.
Wow, that's so powerful. It speaks to the power of our thoughts and how changing how we think can actually like rewire our brain's response to anxiety.
It really does.
It
And it makes you think about those other anxiety disorders like phobias. Those feel so deeply ingrained.
Phobias, yeah, those irrational fears that are just like totally out of proportion to any actual danger. What does Seligman have to say about those?
So he actually dives into the evolutionary roots of fear and how those ancient survival mechanisms could be playing a part in our modern day phobias. He even brings up a personal anecdote, calls it the sauce béarnaise phenomenon to kind of drive the point home.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the sauce béarnaise phenomenon?
So basically, Seligman got really sick, violently ill after eating sauce béarnaise one time. And he developed this like intense aversion to it. And what's so interesting is that even though he knew rationally that the sauce wasn't to blame, he still couldn't shake that feeling of disgust.
So it's like his body just learned to associate the sauce with feeling sick, even though it was this totally illogical connection.
Exactly. And that leads us to the work of John Garcia, who did all these fascinating experiments with rats, where he paired a specific taste with radiation sickness.
Okay.
And they quickly learned to avoid that taste, even if there was a big delay between eating it and getting sick.
So they still made the connection, even if it wasn't immediate.
Yeah, and that's actually super interesting because it goes against the traditional view of how classical conditioning works.
Yeah.
Like usually the stimulus and response need to happen pretty close together in time.
Right.
But Garcia's work really suggests that we're biologically primed to learn certain associations much faster, like that taste aversion thing, even if they don't follow the usual rules.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. But why would that be? Why those specific associations?
Well, think about it from like an evolutionary perspective. Avoiding bad food was like crucial for our ancestors, right?
Right. Poisonous plants, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those who learned quick which foods were a no-go were the ones more likely to survive and pass on their genes.
Makes sense.
So it's like our brains prioritize learning those lessons, even if they break the rules of traditional conditioning. And Seligman connects this whole concept, he calls it prepared learning, to how phobias develop.
Okay.
He suggests We're basically predisposed to develop fears of things that were dangerous way back when.
So things like snakes and spiders, heights, all those classic phobias.
Exactly. Even if we've never personally had a bad experience,
Hmm.
we're still more likely to develop that phobia because they represent those ancient threats.
So it's like they're embedded in our DNA, these fears, this legacy from way back.
Yeah, and that's why it's so tough to, like, talk yourself out of a phobia.
Yeah.
It's not just logic. It's this deep down, instinctual, visceral reaction.
So that's why those exposure therapies like desensitization and flooding, that kind of thing, tend to be more effective for treating phobias because they work on that experiential level.
Exactly. By gradually exposing someone over and over to what they're afraid of.
Mm.
But in a safe environment, you basically retrain that primal part of their brain, the part that's stuck in fight or flight mode.
You're kind of showing the nervous system, hey, this thing you're freaking out about isn't actually dangerous.
Right. And that brings us to another really fascinating anxiety-related condition that Seligman dives into. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD.
OCD,
Mhm.
where those unwanted intrusive thoughts lead to all those ritualistic behaviors to try and reduce the anxiety. What insights does Seligman offer about this condition? Because it can be really debilitating.
Yeah. He uses this really helpful metaphor. He calls it the jingle channel to
Mhm.
try to explain how OCD works. So picture your mind as this radio, right? And it's
Mhm.
constantly playing this stream of thoughts and emotions like, that's your jingle channel.
Okay, so we've all got this jingle channel playing in the background, but for someone with OCD, it's like that channel gets stuck on repeat, right? Playing the same, distressing song over and over.
Exactly. And those repetitive thoughts, the obsessions, they can be super disturbing. And that leads to all the compulsive behaviors that the person feels like they have to do to try to neutralize the anxiety. Seligman even brings up the extreme case of Howard Hughes, remember?
Oh, yeah, The Aviator, the filmmaker.
Yeah, he was brilliant, but became a recluse later in life because of his really severe OCD.
It's tragic. Like those intrusive thoughts and the rituals can completely take over your life.
They absolutely can. And just like those other anxiety disorders, there are all sorts of different theories about the root cause of OCD. Some see it as mainly a biological problem. Others say it's more cognitive, like rooted in thought suppression.
So is it like faulty wiring in the brain, or is it more about how our minds are processing those intrusive thoughts, like
Mhm.
how we're responding to them?
And the interesting thing is both perspectives have some evidence to back them up.
So there are meds that can help manage the thoughts, but there are also therapies that try to change how people respond to those thoughts.
Right. And one of the most effective therapies for OCD is called exposure and response prevention.
And that's the one where they expose you to the things that trigger your obsessions, but then stop you from doing your rituals.
You got it. So it's like facing the fear head on, but without those compulsive behaviors, because those provide relief, but in the long run, they reinforce the cycle.
It makes sense, but it sounds so hard.
It is incredibly challenging, but it can also be really empowering.
Yeah.
The idea is that by confronting those fears over and over, but without doing the compulsions, people learn that their fears are basically unfounded. And then that urge to ritualize slowly fades.
It sounds like such a transformative process.
It can be.
Hmm.
And it really highlights the fact that even super deeply ingrained patterns of thought and behavior can be modified with the right approach.
Okay, so we've really explored a lot here, like those biological pieces of anxiety and how, our evolutionary past might be shaping those present day fears. But what's the takeaway here? Like, where do we even go from here?
Right. Like, what can we actually change when it comes to all this anxiety stuff? And what parts are we kind of just stuck with?
Yeah, I think those are the big questions, right? And I feel like Seligman's work really gives us some good clues.
Yeah.
He's not saying we can just, think our way out of every problem.
Say not.
But he's also not saying that our biology is, our destiny either.
It's not that simple.
Yeah.
It's way more nuanced than that.
Right. It seems like he's really advocating for finding this middle ground, this balance between acceptance and action. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like recognizing those parts that might be harder to change, like our genetic predispositions, but then really putting our energy towards those areas where we actually do have more control, like our thought patterns and our behaviors.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge takeaway for me. It's all about choosing the right intervention for the specific challenge you're facing. And Seligman really emphasizes evidence-based treatments, like those approaches that have been like rigorously tested and shown to actually work.
It's like he's saying, hey, be a smart shopper in that whole self-improvement market. There's just so many fads and quick fixes out there, but he's reminding us to look for those approaches that actually have good research behind them and are really tailored to our individual needs.
Totally. We got to be critical thinkers. Question all those assumptions we make about what we can and can't change, especially in today's world. I mean, there's just so much info out there about self-improvement, and a lot of it's contradictory. So being able to think critically is more important now than ever.
It's like he's giving us this roadmap and a set of tools,
Yes.
right, to navigate this whole complex terrain of human potential and all those limitations.
I love that. A roadmap.
He's encouraging us to be active participants in our own growth and well-being, not just, passively taking in whatever the latest trend or guru is saying.
That's a great way to put it.
And, Seligman doesn't just stop at giving us the map and the tools, right?
Yeah.
He also throws out these super thought-provoking questions for us to think about along the way, like this one. If anxiety is really just this ancient survival mechanism, something that helped our ancestors, get through a world that was full of these real threats, how can we use that energy in a good way today, like in our modern lives?
I love that question. And I think it cuts right to the core of what Seligman's trying to tell us. Instead of just seeing anxiety as this burden or like this thing that's wrong with us, what if we could actually learn how to harness it? Like use that energy to fuel our creativity or our problem solving, even our capacity for empathy and connection.
Right. Turning that raw anxiety energy into something like beautiful and powerful.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming that energy and then using it to create positive change in our lives and even the world around us.
Love that. So to kind of bring it all together, it seems like the big takeaway from all of this is we're not just puppets of our biology or, our past experiences. We have agency. We have the ability to make choices and create real change in our lives.
We do.
But to do that effectively, we got to understand our limitations, but also all that incredible potential we have.
We have to become explorers of our own minds and embrace that incredible journey of self-discovery and transformation that's waiting for us.
Well said. And thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Seligman's work. We hope you found it insightful and, empowering too. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep believing in your own ability to create positive change. Thanks for listening.